Mike is going to give us some information and report on some safflower work that he's done. Mike grew up on a small family farm in northern Utah. He received his bachelor's and master's degree from Utah State University. He has been in Utah State University Extension Service for 22 years. And his research work has been on safflower, and he's actually identified several newer varieties that have higher yields under dryland and irrigated conditions in northern Utah and southern Idaho. So Mike, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Randall. So I appreciated Dr. Larson's comments that he made, when talking about these oilseed crops. And the planting group asked me if I would talk a little bit about oilseed crops and especially how they relate to safflower production. So this was some questions that we had from some of our growers about 10 years ago. They had been growing a lot of safflower here in northern Utah, southern Idaho, and they wanted to know how Camelina and Flax and yellow mustard compared to that safflower production. And so that's where this research came about. If you're not familiar with these crops, Camelina is a very small seed, smaller than our alfalfa seed. You can kind of see on the on the left-hand side there, our seeding rates and that. It's a good crop to put in the springtime of the year and grows very quickly under our northern Utah climate. Flax is another one of those that we see a lot in, if you're health food markets and that, we see a lot of the flower in some of the native lands, along with some reclamation work that we do in Utah along the roadways. And we like it because it'll grow in some of our heavy to medium water holding capacity soils here in Utah. Mustard is one of those, has kind of already been alluded to by Orson, that people are looking at growing. If it's not for the seed, it's grown for a green manure crop that they can then incorporate into your soils and use as a soil fumigant. And so there's a lot of things out there with those. The nice thing about it is as Ryan or Dr. Larson alluded to, is these are crops that we can plant with a no-till, a small grain drill. We don't have to make a lot of changes to this equipment. You can see the seeding rates for these out to the left-hand side of this slide. And, whether we're set up on 6 or 8 inch row spacings or 10 to 12 inch row spacings, we don't have to make those changes with these crops. We can just use the equipment that we have. This is just a picture of the plot work that we had done back in 2008 is when we started with this. And these plots were seeded on May 14th. And again, we'd like to see these seeded as quick as we can get on in the springtime of the year. Some years that can be as early as the first part of April to get those in, to get those growing. You can see how quickly, in that last picture was basically, 2 weeks after they were planted, they were already up, and you can see, growing already. This is what they look like. Those plots look like 6 weeks after planting. You can see the yellow mustard here in the front. We see some blue flax starting to flower. The Camelina has already flowered. And so these are crops that grow very quickly in the springtime of the year under those conditions. And you're able to harvest them off a lot quicker than some of the other things that you might be planting that are longer season. Since this was on an irrigated plot and we were looking at irrigation, for the most part, we had been able to irrigate these with spring rains and that. And then towards the end of June, it started getting dry. And so we ended up putting a couple of irrigations on, about 4.5 inches of water on these plots to really get that seed set and to finish those off really well. And so again, you can kind of see the yellow mustard, the blue flax, the safflower right here, and the Camelina is kind of hidden by these taller plants right here. Just showing you, here's safflower growing around it. These crops are ready to be harvested here in the center. You've got the yellow mustard, the Camelina, and then the flax here in the front. One of the things that's important with these crops is that when they are ready to be harvested, you want to make sure that you've already done the prep work and getting the combine and the trucks ready to go. In this particular instance, we had to wait about 10 days for the combine to get in there, and by then it was too late, and that seed had already started to shatter and dropped a lot of seed on the ground that you can see that germinated after we had harvested the plots, and there was some moisture still left in that they grew. This is a case on some mustard that we had just a couple of years ago, and if you look to the right, you can see those translucent seed pods right here. This was ready to harvest, and we had a hailstorm that came through and put probably 95% of the seed on the ground, and within 2 weeks it had germinated there. So basically a crop loss because we weren't able to get in and harvest it when we needed to. So when we looked and did the took yields for this information, you can see that the safflower in this particular research plot yielded about 4,400 pounds, and that's a good safflower harvest on irrigated ground. You see that Camelina was a little over 2,100 pounds, the flax was a little under 1,500, and then the yellow mustard that year was about 924 pounds. And if you look over to the right, you can see what those crops brought based on the prices that were contract prices for that year. And so you can see that that safflower seed was much more valuable than either the Camelina, the flax, or the yellow mustard that year. We also were looking at those as far as oil production, and you can see that the seed prices far outweighed the oil production for those crops in 2008. So what did it look like in 2009? And I just, because I don't have a lot of time here, you can see that the safflower was about 5,000 pounds. Some of those went up, some of them went down. Camelina went down, the flax went down, and the yellow mustard went up. But you can see that there's a good average, a couple of good years of average here for those crops in comparison to the safflower. So statistically, you can see that the safflower was, in comparison to the other crops, far better yields on those and prices as well. So now I just take the last little bit of time that I have and talk to you a little bit more about safflower. You know, there's a lot of safflower that's been grown in northern Utah and southern Idaho. If you're not familiar with it, it's a member of the thistle family. Has a really nice yellow flower, which then after pollination set, it'll turn into a red and an orange color here in the center of the screen. And we like to grow safflower in northern Utah because it fits in really well on a dryland crop rotation. A typical dryland crop rotation 20, 30 years ago, and sometimes even growers will still use it, is a wheat fallow, which is the top blocks on this slide. And so you're harvesting 3 crops in 6 years. Well, safflower, if you throw safflower into that dryland crop rotation, now you're going to go winter wheat, safflower, fallow, winter wheat, safflower, fallow. And so you're harvesting 4 crops in that 6-year cycle. And the other reason that we like it is because when you're harvesting wheat, fallow, you're using the same tillage practice over and over again. And so some of those weeds, you're going to have more problems with weeds. Whereas with safflower, we're using spring tillage, and that can break up that weed cycle for us. Many of us are familiar with jointed goat grass and have had problems with jointed goat grass in winter wheat, and that's a severe dockage penalty when we take that into the broker. And so safflower has been a good help to us to be able to put another crop in there that now we can use an herbicide that will control that jointed goat grass in there. Lower picture right here is a picture of what safflower seed looks like. Here in Utah, in southern Idaho, we can grow really nice white safflower, and that's what the birdseed market wants, which is where probably 90–95% some years of our safflower is going, is into that birdseed market. When they put it into the birdseed, it looks really nice and pops out and stands out against it. You can kind of see the seeding rates of anywhere from 15 to 25 pounds, depending upon whether it's dryland or irrigated. Doesn't require a lot of fertility. And I've already mentioned kind of our row widths when we're seeding it in both irrigated and dryland. One of the things that's critical when you're talking about some of these alternative crops is don't go into some of these fields if you've got a weedy field thinking that you're going to be able to clean it completely out. You want to start with a fairly clean field and then be able to clean up some of the problem weeds that you might have. With Sonoland, that's a product that we incorporate into the soil before we plant safflower. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen what that product does for us in comparison to our control here on the right-hand side of the screen right there. So it does allow us with some of these crops, but we don't have a lot of options out there. And I think we've covered that in some of our other topics and some of the other nights about the importance of some of these other crops. As Dr. Larson mentioned, safflowers, again, is one of those things that we can harvest with a combine with the typical equipment that we already have. You're looking at harvesting safflower 20 weeks after planting at about 8% moisture. And you do have to mess around with some of your sieves and that for harvesting safflower. This is just a picture of safflower when it's ready to harvest. And that's a really nice crop of safflower right there, probably in that 4,500 pound safflower range. One of the other things that we mentioned in growing safflower is the whoever you're contracting with probably have in that contract somewhere that it needs to be a white safflower. And some of that is due to the safflower varieties that we have, but then some of it is also grown because here in Utah, we don't have a lot of water, or excuse me, a lot of rain in the summer times. And so we don't get a lot of dockage with that. But you can see these varieties are color scored on 1s and 2s are going to be this nice white safflower, where 3s and 4s are going to be something like this brown tan colored safflower right here in the center. And so they want those 1s and 2s. This is a variety trial that we finished up in 2016 out at Blue Creek, and you can kind of see the gross income based on the value of safflower that year. And safflower is one of those crops that we like because even on irrigated ground, if you think it's going to have we're going to have a dry year and you can use your water over on to a corn crop or out onto your alfalfa, you can push that water that may be from this safflower field and put it over there and still harvest a crop of safflower. So we like it. Just showing that there's been quite a bit of research done at Utah State University looking at different varieties of safflower. Some of those have been in our variety trials for 7 to 9 years, and you can kind of see what they look like through time, where others have only been in for a couple of years and how they're yielding. But we do have some really good safflower varieties that we can grow here in Utah. Just showing you, this slide is showing you kind of the work that we have done with safflower. I mentioned the variety trials, but we've done a lot with row spacings and seeding rates. And right now, Dr. Creech and myself and a couple of other co-workers are looking at dormant seeding safflower and herbicides that we can use in the springtime of the year. If you're looking at wanting to know more information about safflower, there are some good publications out there that Utah State University have done. You can Google, the USU crops, or the website is mentioned right there for you. And I have my information right here. You can either send me a text, email, whatever's convenient for you, and I'd be happy to answer those questions.